My story begins when I was looking for a new home to rent for me and my 2 young daughters, who were 9 and 10 at the time. This was a time before you could go on an app on your phone and find rentals easily. So I had to drive around my town, searching and hoping for rental signs. It was on one of these drives that I finally came across a 2-story condo for rent, unit number 63. I parked and took my 2 daughters out of the car to see if there was a flyer on the rental sign with the phone number to schedule a viewing. Also, to see if we could sneak a peek through the windows. That is when we saw that the front door was open and various people were walking around the condo. We were then greeted by an elderly woman and man who ushered towards us to come in. They informed me that they were having an open house, and they would take us on a tour. They also had printed applications ready for anyone that was interested. Of course, I took them up on their offer, and they toured my daughters and I around their home. The first floor was a decent size for our small family. It was an open concept, connecting the living room, dining room, the kitchen, and then the laundry room towards the back. To the left of the living room was the master bedroom, with a full bathroom connected. When it came time to show us the second level of the condo, the elderly woman pulled her husband aside to speak with him privately. I wasn't trying to snoop on their conversation, but I could clearly hear her tell her husband to take us upstairs because he knows she doesn't like going up there. This should have been the first red flag, but I figured with her being elderly that she probably just didn't like climbing stairs. Once upstairs, I could see to the right that there was an open loft directly above the kitchen that overlooked the dining room and living room. My daughters were thrilled at the thought of this being their new playroom. Then to the left of the stairs was a door leading to the second bedroom. The elderly man ushered us forward into the room as he stood back at the top of the stairs. He told us to feel free to look around, which was strange considering he had accompanied us along the tour of the rest of the home. This room would be the only room he hadn't walked through with us. Immediately after entering the room, there was a noticeable difference in temperature. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I stopped in my tracks, but my daughters rushed past me into the room, excited that this would be their new bedroom. Seeing them excited made me disregard the uneasiness I initially felt, so I continued walking through the room. It was a large room, with its own full bathroom and a small window that overlooked the courtyard in the center of all the condos. I debunked the coldness in the room to possibly being a draft from that window. It was an older home, so it was likely that the seals on the window were worn down. In all the excitement, my daughters pleaded with me to make this our new home, so I filled out one of the paper applications that the landlords eagerly had ready, and of course, a couple weeks later, it was ours. Since we didn't have much in terms of furniture, we were able to move in everything the same day we got the keys. Seeing all our belongings in the condo made it officially feel like our home, and nothing but excitement filled the air. Until nightfall, when darkness flooded the home. My mom, along with my younger brother and sister, who were around the same age as my daughters at the time, were so excited that they wanted to spend the first night in our home with us. All 4 children slept in the downstairs master bedroom, while my mom and I slept on the 2 couches in the living room. We were all nestled up and dreaming away, when suddenly I was awoken to the sound of a croaking voice saying my name. My eyes shot open, and I sleepily peered into the darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I saw my mother laying on her side facing me, with her eyes nearly bulging out of her head. Her hand was extended towards me as she pleaded for me to help her in the croaking tone that had awoken me. I jumped up and ran towards her to shake her awake, assuming she was having a bad dream. The children had heard the commotion and were out of the room now, crying as they heard my mother's struggling screams. Then suddenly, she sat up quickly and was coughing as she could finally catch her breath. She was shaking terribly and crying. Once she could speak, she proceeded to tell me that she was not asleep, but her encounter was certainly a nightmare. She awoke to the feeling of a heavy pressure on her chest, slowly suffocating her. Even though it was dark, she saw a black mass engulf her body as the life was being strangled out of her. That is when she tried to wake me up to help her, but she said she couldn't move or speak. My first thought was that she had suffered a heart attack or stroke, so I asked if she needed to go to the hospital. But my mom was adamant that whatever happened to her was not medical. She said she didn't need to go to the hospital, but she did need to get out of that house. My mother's voice remained raspy for the next few days while I recovered from whatever injured it. Nothing else strange happened for a month or so after that incident, other than that my daughters refused to sleep in their new room upstairs. My daughters never had an issue sleeping in their own room before, but I figured they were still scared of what happened to their grandma the first night. I didn't mind them sleeping with me either, because I admittedly was a bit frightened to sleep alone too. But other than that, all was well in our new home, and we were enjoying it. Then I got news that my teenage nephew from San Diego was coming into town to visit. I was so excited for him to visit, so I offered for him to stay with me since I had a spare bedroom upstairs. When he got to my house, my daughters excitedly gave him a tour of the condo. But after coming back down from upstairs, he asked if he could sleep on the couch in the living room instead of in the upstairs bedroom. I was confused by his request, but I didn't push the issue, and I told him he was welcome to sleep wherever he pleased. I could see relief wash over his face as he uneasily glanced towards the upstairs. That night, we all slept well, aside from hearing my nephew walking around every now and then throughout the night. I figured he was just uncomfortable sleeping in a strange place, and was probably having insomnia. So I let him be, and stayed in bed rather than getting up to check on him. I assumed all was well, until the next morning, when he asked if he could stay at his grandma's house for the remainder of his visit in town. I was sad and asked why. He proceeded to explain that he woke up in the middle of the night, to a heavy pressure on his chest, and he couldn't breathe. Neither my mother nor I had told anybody about what happened to her that first night. So I was shocked to hear that the same thing happened to my young nephew. He said he got up to get water and walk around, but every time he tried to sleep, the same thing would happen, so he ended up staying awake all night. Like my mother, he too saw the black mass engulf him, while he gasped for air under the pressure of its weight. He said he couldn't explain how, but he could feel anger from the black mass, and whatever it was, it wanted him dead. At the time, none of us had any idea how true that statement would become. It's hard to believe something like this, especially when you have no idea what it is. That is, until it happens to you. One day, while my daughters were at school, I decided to relax on the living room couch and read a book. Naturally, the book made me sleepy, so I dozed off without a second thought. I then found myself in the same predicament as those before me. The hovering black mass, except for me, looked like a dark silhouette of a man, began engulfing me in its presence. Then came the suffocating pressure on my chest, and the inability to scream for help, except I was home alone, and there was no one to help me. I began reciting the prayers that I had learned as a child, in hopes that they would somehow release me from the grasp of my invisible captor, but it was no use. I could feel my body becoming weaker as it failed in its fight, until suddenly I could hear my daughters running into the house shouting for me. To my greatest relief, I was finally able to move, and I jumped up from the couch to see my mother and daughters staring at me with faces of horror. I quickly turned to look into the mirror on the wall next to the front door, and that is when I saw what horrified them. There were 2 large handprints spread across my neck and chest region. In that moment, it no longer became a figment of our imaginations. We now had visible proof.